everybody. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I go about animating objects in Unity. We're going to cover two of the approaches I usually take. One when I'm animating slightly more complicated objects like this treasure chest, which has multiple objects like the lid and the lock and the base. And then how I go about animating simple things like maybe a rotating pistol that's a pickup, or this door on this house. The second approach is much simpler because the animations can be done procedurally, but the first approach with the more complicated objects will be done using Unity's animation system. So let's jump right in. So if I wanted to animate this treasure chest, what I would probably go about doing is if I'm not animating in Blender that is, I would go about creating a new folder in my project to keep track of anything animation related. So we'll create a new folder called animations. And inside of that, I'm going to create a new animation controller. We'll call the animation controller chest animator. And what an animation controller is simply a state machine management system for different animation clips. So for example, if I have an open chest animation clip, then the state manager will determine when that animation plays and when it doesn't. All right, so now that I've got an animation controller, I can go ahead and create an animation clip. We'll call this open chest. So an animation clip is just going to keep track of all of my animation data and keyframes. So I'm going to drag in my animation clip into the animation controller. And what the animation controller's state machine is saying now is as soon as this animation controller fires up, it's going to immediately play the open chest animation. So we'll obviously want to change that a little bit later so that it only opens up when the player presses the F key or something to that effect. So now I'm just going to open up this open chest animation clip. And then I'm going to select my chest animator, my chest game object, sorry. I'm just going to remove, I had a procedural animation clip in here earlier, but a script, sorry, but I'm just going to delete that. And for now, we're going to use the animation controller. But now you can see that nothing shows up in my animation selections in the clip window. That's because I haven't added my animation controller to my chest game object just yet. So I'm going to drag that in now. Now, just thinking ahead a bit, the problem that will happen now is if I were to animate the base of this chest game object, so if I were to animate the position or the rotation, and I would have set an idle keyframe for the current rotation. So its current rotation is at whatever, like 80 degrees. The problem is if I keyframe this in, so if I add a keyframe that says that this rotation should be 104, then no matter what rotation I set beforehand, it's going to automatically update that to what I set the initial keyframe to. So to make that not happen, what we should actually do is create a parent for this game object. So we'll create an empty parent called chest parent. And this is actually the game object that we want the animator to be a part of. So we'll just go remove this from the chest game object, and we'll add the chest animator to the chest parent. So this way, if I wanted to, I could just reset the parent rotation, and then the animation will just affect everything that is a child of it. Now that we have an animator controller on the chest parent game object, let's open up our animation clip. And with our chest parent, now we can see that we can select this open chest animation clip. And now, if we enable keyframe recording, then what that lets us do is every time we change something that's a child of the chest parent game object, it will create a keyframe. So what exactly is a keyframe? It's just a collection of data entries. So for example, there I changed the rotation and Unity created a new keyframe for me that keeps track of the X, Y, and Z values of this of the chest game object. So if I were to move this forward to say like 20 milliseconds, and then I rotated it to another direction, it inserts a new keyframe for me with this new rotation value. And then if I drag my timeline across, I can see the chest will animate according to that. So that's pretty cool, and we can use that to our advantage to create a cool animation. So what I'm looking for with the chest is at the start of the animation, I want it to kind of scale up and scale down, and then I want the lock to fall off of the chest, and then I want the lid to flip open. So let's go ahead and animate that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create some idle animations. So what we'll do is we'll set the rotation of this at idle to 0 so that it's just a good neutral starting point. And then we can also just insert a new keyframe for the position and the scale by right-clicking and saying add keyframe. So this essentially sets an idle keyframe for us. So whenever this starts, it will reset the values back to what we set at the beginning. And now what we can do is, let's do a scale up and scale down, kind of like an expansion and contraction. So to do that with our chest game object selected, we'll just increase the scale a bit, maybe to around 2-ish. And then we'll move our timeline head a bit further forward to about the 20 millisecond mark. And then I just want this initial keyframe again, so I'll just select the top piece, which selects all the sub keyframes. And I'll copy that with Control-C, and I'll paste it with Control-V. So now we get this cool little expansion contraction effect. So that's cool. And then as it gets back to its normal position, I want the lock to fall off. So what I can do here is I'll select the lock in the hierarchy, and with it selected, I will just add a keyframe for its position, its rotation, and its scale. I don't really plan on affecting its scale, but it can't hurt to just add it in case. So now what will happen is it will expand, contract, and then it will keep the position of the lock. But then let's say at around 30 milliseconds, what I want to do is I want to move the lock down a bit. So we'll move it to about here. So now if we look at this, it expands, contracts, and then the lock falls. And then at this point, I want the lock to disappear. So how we can do that is at the keyframe just before, with the lock selected, we can right click on the enabled property of the game object, and we can say add key. So now we know that the lock will be enabled at this keyframe. And then when we move over to the 30 millisecond mark, we can just untick the active state, and now the game object will disappear. So now we have expand, contract, and then the game object disappears. It looks a bit weird that the lock just kind of falls in a straight line. So maybe what we can do is we can add some rotation. So at this point, let's just rotate this lock to about there. So there we go. That has a cool little rotation animation as the lock falls. I think it happens a bit too fast. If we play this through and we look at it, it kind of just happens a bit too fast. So what we can do is we'll just select all of these keyframes and we'll just drag them out further to around the 40 millisecond mark. We'll play that again, and that looks pretty cool, a lot more visible to the user. Now, once this disappears, what we want to do is we want to animate the lid to open up. So we can select the lid, and then we'll just add a keyframe for the position, and we'll add a keyframe for the rotation, so that we know the lid is at the closed position when we get here. And then once we have that in place, we can move to around the 1 second mark, and then we can rotate our lid to what would be an open position, to around there. So now, if we play our whole animation, we can see it expands, contracts, and then the lid opens. And that looks alright, but I think it's useful sometimes to have a bit more control over how the animations look. So when this lid opens, it's very linear at this point because that's how Unity handles keyframes. So it's got the rotation data here and the rotation data here, and it just linearly interpolates between these two. So if we wanted to change the way that looks, we can make use of the curve editor. So with the curve editor selected, we can then select the lid of the chest. So let's look at the lid's rotation, and this highlights for us each of the different animation curves. So this way we can change how that animation happens. So maybe we want it to happen faster at the beginning and slower at the end. So to do that, we can just shift one of these handles up and over. So now if we were to look at this, we can see because of this little bend in the curve, the the lid actually moves down first and then starts to move up. So what we can do is we can just select this handle, and then we can move it down to here so that doesn't really happen. And then we get a nice little delay, and then it flicks open. And I think that looks pretty cool. So now if we go back to our dope sheet, we can have a look at this animation go. And that looks really nice. Cool, so then we can stop our keyframe recording, save this. Now, let's just reset this to 0 in our child game object. Now, if we were to play our game, let's just make sure that our character can actually see it. We'll move our chest parent over to this side. We'll rotate it so that the player can see. And then we will just pause and start our game. Now, if we look at this in the game view, it's a little bit hard to see. So we'll just put our game window over on this side, and then we can just step through this and we can see our animation plays as the game starts. And if we unpause that, then that looks really nice. So now, how do we go about making it so that this chest only shows up, this animation, only plays when the player interacts with it? So what we can do to make that happen is, in our animation controller, we can create a new parameter. And we'll create a new Boolean parameter and we'll call it open. And then what we'll do is in here, we'll create a new empty state. And this empty state will be our idle state. So we don't want any animation data in here. And we want to actually, so we'll create a new transition from entry to idle by right-clicking it and saying make transition and selecting the idle state. And if we right-click the idle state, we can say set as layer default state. So this will change what the default state is in our animation controller. So when the game starts, nothing's going to happen. And then we can make a transition from our idle state to our open chest state. So that will say we want to transition from idle to open chest, but we need to give this a condition. So if we click the transition line, then we have an option to set some conditions here. And now, if we click the add button, we can add a condition that says when this open condition is set to true, then I want you to do this transition. And now, if we were to play our game, we can see that nothing happens. And then if we exit out, and if I tick this box manually, then we can see that after a little bit of time, our animation then plays. So if we wanted to reduce the transition time between when the animation stops and plays, we can have a look in the settings here. And here you can see that the idle animation currently has an exit time of 0.75. So even once this condition is set to true, it will wait 0.75 seconds before it does the transition to open. So I actually don't want a transition, an exit time there. I want it to happen immediately. So I'll just untick has exit time. So now if we play our game, and if we just come back to our animation controller and tick the box, then you'll see our animation plays immediately. Cool. So obviously now you don't want to have to tick this. In game, you would want to set this via code. So let's take a look at how we can set an animator's value from code. So in our scripts, let's create, I've got an animations folder for scripts. So in here, I'm just going to create a new script, mono behavior script, and we're going to call it chest animator controller. Okay, and then we're going to drag this into the chest parent. I'm currently working on an interaction system that I will be sharing with all of you guys. But that's still in progress, so when it's ready, I'll be sure to make a tutorial for everybody. Okay, let's bring this over here so you can see what's going on. And in here, I'm gonna create a new, private animator, and we'll call this chest animation controller. And then in the start method, I'm just gonna get this component. So I'm gonna say chest animator controller equals get component animator. So that's just gonna go and look through what this game object is attached to try and find the animator component. So it will get that on start. And then what we want to do is we just want to have a variable, a public function that lets something call this chest animator to set that Boolean variable to true in the animation controller. So we can have a public void open chest function, for example. And in here, we want to call chest animation controller dot set bool. And I think we called our bool open. And we want to set that value to true. So now when this function is called, then our chest animation controller will change the value of that open variable to true. And then I'm just going to go to my player right now. And this is very hacky, which is why I'm building an interaction system. But for now, I'm just going to get a reference to the chest animation controller. Private game object. Let's actually just get the chest animator controller. Let's go chest animator controller. So this is directly in our input script. And what I'm going to do here is when the player presses the F key, I'm going to call the chest animator controller dot set open variable. So in here, I'm just going to say if input dot get key down, and I'm going to say key code dot f, then I'm going to call chest animator controller dot open chest. So now when the player presses the F key, it's going to call the chest animator controller and set that variable in our animator. So if we start our game, and if we hit the F key and nothing happens, and that's because we didn't assign our chest controller to our player input script. So I'm just going to drag in the chest parent, which has the chest animator controller in it, so that it actually has that reference. And now if we hit the F key, then we can see the chest opens. Cool. So that's how you would go about creating a manual animation by setting the keyframes yourself and then updating the variable at the end of it. So now what if we had a simple object like this pistol and we want to tell the player that they can pick it up, so we want to rotate it constantly. So what we can do here and how I do this is with a package called DOTween. So if we go to Window, Package Manager, and we search for DOTween, you'll just need to add this to your Unity account if you haven't yet. You can find it in the store. I'll leave a description. I'll leave a link to that package in the description down below. Also, if you would like to follow along with any of the models and assets you see in the scene, you can download all of those on Patreon. My Patreon subscribers get free access to everything I create. So yeah, go check that out. And thanks so much to my Patreon subscribers. You guys are the best. You keep me going. All right. Anyway, so once you've added this to your Unity account, just install it into your project. And then you also need to just go to Tools, Demi-Giant, and you'll see an option for DOTween, and then you just need to set this up. So if you haven't, then you just click the Setup DOTween modules, and you just leave it on the defaults and click Apply, and then that will set up your whole Unity environment so that you can use DOTween. And what this lets us do, so if we were to create a script, we'll create a new mono behavior script, and we'll call this pistol rotate script. The beauty of DOTween is, okay, I'm just going to delete the update. But what we can do is we can simply write transform. So we'll get the current transform because we're going to attach the script to our pistol. And then we can write do rotate. And then this will go and do a rotation for us based on the input value we give it. Okay, so what we can do is we want to rotate this on the on the y-axis. So the y-axis so that it continuously spins like this. So then we can say we want to rotate you 0f, and on the y-axis we want to go 180 degrees, and on the z-axis we don't want to rotate anything. And then a duration, so we can set the speed. So let's create a variable here so that we can update this from the editor. We'll call this float rotation speed. And we'll set this to 1 second by default, so it will do a full rotation in 1 second. Then we'll just pass in the rotation speed here. Now, because we want this to continuously rotate, what we can do is we can call, let me check my notes, set loops, and we can pass this in as -1. So if we pass this in as -1, then DOTween will do this rotation consistently over and over again. So if we stop that, and to our pistol script, we attach our pistol rotate script, and we hit the start button. Then our pistol rotates. It's a bit wonky right now. It's rotating on multiple axes, which is not what we want. So there are some settings in DOTween that we can use to fix this. So if we head back here, first of all, we can fix the rotation axis by saying rotate mode dot world axis add. So this will set the rotation based on the world axis, which presumably should fix everything. If not, we can try local axis add and see if that works. There we go. So now, because we're using the world axis, it will use the y-axis to rotate. But as you can see, because I put in 180 degrees, it's not rotating all the way. So let's update that. We'll actually just get the rotation value we want from a serialized field so that we can change it in the editor if we want. So we'll just call this rotation vector. Rotation vector equals new vector 3, and we'll say 0f, 360f, and 0f. And then instead of using this manual thing, we'll replace it with our rotation vector. And now, we can hit play, and let's see what that looks like. Cool. So, as we can see now, it rotates the full 360 degree rotation we wanted, but DOTween uses sine interpolation by default. So that's why it does this easing where it goes fast and then slows down towards the end and then stops. So if we want that to be a linear rotation, then what we can do in here, checks nodes, we can set easing. So we can say set ease to ease.linear. And what that will do is just have no fancy interpolation. It will simply just rotate in a linear fashion. And there we go. So now our pistol rotates continuously, which is really, really cool. So now the final thing is something as simple as a door. So with this, again, this is a use case where I would use a DOTween script rather than a manual animation. I'm gonna create a new monobehavior script. We'll call it door open script. Oh gosh, putting script in a script is a terrible naming practice, so please don't do that. But we'll just call this door open. All right, and then we're gonna do the same thing. So this time, maybe we'll do it with a function so that when the user presses the F key, then it opens this door. Again, this is obviously not the best way to handle interactions, so keep an eye out on my channel if you want to see the development of a decent interaction system. But for now, this will get the idea across, I think. So let's create a new function called open door, and then inside of here, what we're going to do is, oops, not that, transform.do rotate, and again, we can serialize this so that we can update the rotation vector from the editor if need be. So vector 3, rotation vector, equals new vector 3, and we want to rotate this 0f, and then maybe like I'd say like 110 degrees on the y-axis, and then 0 on the z-axis. And then in here we can pass in our rotation vector. We'll also need a field for our speed, so let's create a float underscore open speed, and we'll make this like faster. Nobody wants to wait 1 second to see a door open. And we'll just pass in the open speed here. Oops, open speed, and then we'll set the rotate mode to world axis add, so that it uses the world axis again, not the local axis. And then we just need to add this to our door in our house. So I'm just gonna remove this, which was my interaction system door. Cool, so now that's on there. And then the last thing we want to do is we just want to make this happen when the player presses a button. So I'm going to go back to my player input script, and then here I'm going to check for a different button. So let's say input.getKey down, and we'll say keycode.e. And in here we want to get a reference to our door. What do we call that? Door open script. Open, and then this now has a public function that we can call door open dot open door. So then we finally just need to assign that. So in our player, we'll just drag this in here. Again, guys, this is just for testing. Like, this is a really bad way to control when animations play or when doors open. You want a proper interaction system for that. So yeah. Just reaffirming that. So now if we go look at our door and we hit the E key, then it opens, but it opens in the wrong direction. So now thanks to the editor value, we can just go and change that. So we'll go to our door, and we'll just say we want this to be negative 110 instead of 110. Cool, so now if we go to our door, and we hit E, boom, there we go. So now our door opens nicely, and that works a treat. And if we hit F, our chest animation plays, and that also works a treat, and our pistol is rotating away. So anyway, that's my general process for animating things. Let me know what you thought of this video. It's a lot more impromptu and casual, so I hope you enjoyed it, but I'm keen to hear your feedback in the comments down below. Don't forget to check out my Patreon page if there's any assets that you see on here that would be interesting, or if you just like to support the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.